As you're seated, why don't you stand? Can we thank the band? The band, we're thankful for many people who serve on different teams, and the band's here early, obviously. And just so you know, I mean, it takes quite a few volunteers, between 20 and 30 every Sunday, to make things happen. And sometimes midweek, sometimes on a Sunday morning. And so we're just so thankful for the ways that people step up and serve. If I haven't met you, my name is Matteo, and hi. Hi, all right. And I'm one of the pastors here, and this morning we are starting a new series. Are you excited? No, okay, one person, all right. We're starting a new series, and it's called, a wisdom-filled summer, and it's really a study in the Proverbs. We're gonna be looking at the Proverbs throughout the next few weeks and throughout the summer. And it's really all about how, God invites us to become the kind of people who are wise. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And if at all you have the internet at home, or if you are on social media, there was this thing that's been going viral on the internet, and it's called the Face App Challenge, or the Aging Challenge. Have you heard about this thing? Okay, good. You've heard about this? Okay, so basically the way it works is that you download this app and you take a picture of yourself, and then it makes you look old. And everybody's doing it, and it's a whole challenge, and I refuse to participate. But this morning, I wanted to do something for you. For you. So here, because I know how hard it is to see a young guy like me teach all of you about wisdom. So I just want you to imagine this is what I look like today. That's me. Oh, I look good. Come on. I know what you're thinking. I need to do something about those eyebrows, right? I know but actually the real reason for why I do this is that there's actually this myth in our culture that with age comes wisdom, right? Automatically, as I grow old, I'll grow wise. But that's not true. And that's one of the things we're gonna remind you of in this series, is that actually you can get older and not grow wiser. You could look like that and not be wise. Although I do kind of look good, right? It's Bethany's lucky, right? Right, someone? and actually, I mean, I was thinking about this, and I was looking up who are some of the famous wise people in our culture, and here are some pictures of some famous wise people in our culture. Right there you see them. You got Yoda, right? Gandalf, Rafiki, right? Xavier, the karate guy, Mr. Miyagi, right? And Princess Leia had to make it, right? But according to our culture, to the attributes of wisdom is, you're old, you have a beard. Most of the time you're a male, so sorry ladies. Just kidding. But it's generally accepted that, as you get older, you're gonna be wiser. And yet the Bible warns us how easy it is for us to grow old without growing in wisdom. And not only that, but it could be very easy for us, if we believe this, to think that, everybody below a certain age is excused from growing in wisdom. That somehow growing in wisdom is just for old people. But in the Book of Proverbs, actually, we're invited to consider that actually everybody's invited to grow in wisdom. Everybody of every age is invited to grow in wisdom. In fact, the Proverbs, in Jewish tradition, young boys, as they were coming of age, would read it and learn it and memorize it. So I just want to speak to all ages in the room, the young people, the teens, the youth, right? You're not excused from growing in wisdom. You're invited to grow in wisdom. Okay? So the Proverbs ask us, whether you're 15, whether you're 20, whether you're 50, how are you growing in wisdom? Are you wiser today than you were a year ago, than you were a month ago? What plans do you have right now in your life that are gonna help you grow in wisdom, that are gonna help your kids grow in wisdom? Now, this is important because, Jesus often, when he was alive, later on in history, he's talking a lot about this thing called the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. And oftentimes I think we think that that's, he's referring to like the end of the world, or maybe he's talking about life after death. But what we find is actually the kingdom of God has a lot to do with living here and now, living wisely here and now. And when Jesus talked about this, he reminds us that so much is at stake if we don't live with wisdom. So much is at stake. And this is how he says it in Matthew 7. You could follow along. It says, "Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." So much is at stake. And so the wisdom that we get in the book of Proverbs, in the Proverbs, aren't just about really nice advice. They're not just life hacks or tips, but actually meant to help us become a certain kind of person. We're invited, and I'm going to say that over and over this morning, we're invited to become a certain kind of person to know how to handle challenges and situations as they arise. So what's at stake for you when you look at your life if you don't grow in wisdom? If you think of this year, if you think of as we go through the summer and approach the fall, things are going to happen in your life. You'll meet new people. You'll maybe start a new job, start a new relationship. Maybe your kids are going to grow up a little bit and they'll get older. You'll find yourself in some relational conflict, or maybe even a conflict with work. Maybe you're going to experience loss. What will happen if you don't have wisdom? What will you do? Call Dom. Just kidding. Don't. The word that's actually used often to describe a person who doesn't care about wisdom, all throughout the Proverbs, and what we read here in what Jesus says, is a fool. A fool. Do you know any fools? Are you married to a fool? Don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. And this is a constant theme throughout the Proverbs. It's so much easier to identify the foolishness out there than it is to identify the foolishness in us. And yet that's part of what wisdom entails. And so this morning, I want to kind of look at right at the beginning. I want to start at the beginning of the book of Proverbs and really ask, what is wisdom really, and where does it come from? So we're going to kind of focus, if you're following along in a Bible, or you could open up to chapter 1 of Proverbs, and I'll be a little bit everywhere. By the way, just so you know, we do have, if you're new and you're visiting and you don't have a Bible, we do have Bibles for you. So just come see me or someone that seems to know what they're doing. We'd love to give you a Bible. We'd love to give you a Bible, okay? And so we're going to invite you this series to read the Proverbs. And we're going to start right at the beginning. Proverbs 1 to 3, and you'll see it behind me. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair." I love that it starts this way. Right at the start of the book, we're told that wisdom is something that leads to a life that is right, just, and fair. In other words, wisdom in the Bible always serves and heals the community. Okay? And this is so important because it confronts us right at the beginning as we read this book. It confronts our motivation. Why do you want wisdom? Why do you want knowledge? Why do you want to grow in your skills and instruction and your knowledge? Why do you want to learn? Why? What's your motivation? And this is important because in our culture, most people want wisdom. A lot of people want knowledge. They spend a lot of money to hire professionals to have an education so that they could gain knowledge and insight and skill so they could be successful and rich and impressive. And there's this whole industry that we know of called self-help. And I'm not going to bash any of that. Some of that is good. It's fine if you read that. But if wisdom begins and ends with me, it's not biblical wisdom. if it's just all about how I can be a certain kind of person, how I can have more knowledge or more insight, that's not biblical wisdom. Biblical wisdom points us to the other. It points us to the other. It helps us become the kind of people who are sensitive to those things in the world that are not right, that are not just, and that are not fair. How are you becoming that kind of person? How are your kids, when they see you, becoming that kind of person? And one of the things that's so common and popular in our culture right now is this idea that, you really just need to be positive. You just need to really just remain positive and get positive vibes and resist anything that is negative. And I see that's partly good, actually, because sometimes we can be overwhelmed with negativity, and we can become so swamped with, and we need to learn to be a little bit more grateful or a little bit more hopeful. And so there's a truth to that, but there's a dark side to this idea that we just need to be positive. And I'll show you an example, and you'll see it behind me on the screen. This was on my social media feed, and it said, how to stop negative thoughts. And I know you probably can't read all of those things, but one of the things that it says here is that, just visualize positive situations instead of negative ones, because your brain, get this, doesn't know what's reality and what's imaginary. In other words, trick your brain into ignoring the reality of a broken world. Trick your brain into just ignoring any negative things in the world. See, you can be so positive that you never really pay attention to the things in the world that are not right, that are not just, and that are not fair. That's not biblical wisdom. And there's a whole generation of people that are buying into this idea. They think that's really the best way to be wise. Just block out anything negative. I just wonder, what would Mother Teresa say about that? Mother Teresa, one of the most influential, world-changing people, inspiring to so many, faced negativity every single day. Wisdom is much more than positivity. It's much more than self-help. And we learn here as well that wisdom is much more than simply knowing information. See, wisdom, this is an important thing, that wisdom includes knowledge, but it's much more than knowledge. See, you could memorize the Book of Proverbs and still not have wisdom. You could listen to sermons after sermon after sermon for years and still not have wisdom. You could go to Bible studies after Bible study after Bible study and still not have wisdom. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times in our vocabulary, if you're a Christian, we often talk about, being fed. Being fed, and I think most of the time what we mean is, I got a new idea, like being fed from the Word. I got a new idea to think about. And that's important that we have more information and new ideas, but that doesn't necessarily equate to wisdom. And don't get me wrong, an education is very important. You should have an education. You should educate yourself, but it doesn't necessarily lead to wisdom. And in fact, the Proverbs warn us of this. The Proverbs warn us that knowing Proverbs won't necessarily lead to wisdom, and sometimes it could even be counterproductive. I'll show you an example in Proverbs 26. It says, in verse 7 and verse 9, it says, like the useless legs of one who is lame is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Or, I like this one, a proverb in the mouth of a fool is like a thorny branch waved around by a drunk. I don't know about you, I just think of Homer Simpson when I read that. Right? Sometimes knowledge will just hurt us and hurt the people around us. If you're a fool, knowledge is not the same as wisdom. Knowledge is not the same as wisdom. So wisdom is not just about gaining more information, and it's not about self-help and positivity, but it makes us the kinds of people who serve and heal the community, who pay attention to what is not right, what is not just, and what is not fair. So what we'll do in this series, we're going to invite you to read the Proverbs. And I want to introduce you to this tool that I've used in the past, and you could use this tool throughout the series, but also in your life. And so the way it works is this. There are 31 chapters in the Proverbs. Okay, so basically one chapter for every day of the month. I know what you're saying. Some months don't go to 31. You'll figure that one out, right? But the way it works is that today is the 21st, right? So today you go home, you read Proverbs chapter 21. And maybe you could read chapter 1 as well. And tomorrow, you'll forget. So that's okay. The day after, you could read chapter 23. Eventually, over time, you'll be just reading the Proverbs. And you'll grow in wisdom. And I say this because sometimes, I think a lot of us feel this sense like, I want to read the Bible, but I'm not really sure what to do or what to read. Just start this way. Read a proverb. One chapter from the Proverbs. Now, a word of warning as you get into the book of Proverbs. There's this tendency in us to want to make the Bible into this answer book as opposed to a book that actually invites us to grow in wisdom. And so let me explain the difference. See, the answer book model is this idea that when I have a question and when I have a problem, when I have a crisis of some sort, the Bible better kind of address it quickly and easily whenever I need. Okay? That's the answer book model. Instead, the Proverbs offer something else. They're not necessarily offering us easy answers, but they're inviting us to become a certain kind of person that makes wise choices. The answer book model doesn't actually require that we develop wisdom. And what's worse, it causes us to develop a view of God as this helicopter God. You know what I'm saying? Helicopter parent God. Right? Okay, let me just say this. Usually in a couple, between two people, husband and wife, there's usually one parent that's a helicopter parent. It's not Bethany. I didn't expect this to happen. I'm a bit of a helicopter parent, and I'm always worrying, and I'm always concerned about my son, Ambrose. He's almost 2, but listen, have you seen Ambrose? Have you seen the size of his head? His head is huge and his body is small. It's like a watermelon on a toothpick. So the moment he gets up, I am like, he's wobbling around, he hits it, he falls, and not only physical like danger, I'm worried about emotional trauma. How many parents? Confession, right? I'm just worried that I'm gonna do something wrong or say something wrong or not do something wrong or not say something right. And somehow it's gonna lead to him having this emotional trauma where he's gonna need hours of therapy and he's gonna run away. He's gonna be homeless by age 8. I think about all these things, right? And even now, I'm actually nervous that he'll somehow find out that I said something about his head. And he's gonna develop a complex, so please don't tell him. He's 2, he's not even 2 yet, but I'm worried. And Bethany's the opposite, by the way. She's just like, it's fine, they're resilient. Resilient? Every day is a new bump. The other day, actually, we were just eating, and all of a sudden, his eyes were closing, and it looked like I was like, that's it. That's it. He's done. It's over. He was fine. He was just tired. But so I become this helicopter where I just hover around my son, and I'm like always kind of thinking, are you going to trip on that? Let me get that. Are you crying? Okay, I'll pick you up. You're sad? Okay, you want crackers for supper? No problem, right? Whatever it is, I'll fix it for you. I'll help you. I'll be there. Maybe I just don't like crying babies. I don't know. I do like crying babies, okay? But I think we have this view of God sometimes. We have this view of God that, he'll just come and swoop in and fix the problems that I've created. He'll answer my questions the moment I have them. He'll protect me from being disappointed. He'll protect me from the consequences of my choices. He'll, come and bail me out whenever I mess up and give me easy answers to my questions. See, a helicopter God isn't concerned with helping you develop wisdom. And the science behind this is very clear. Helicopter parenting prolongs childhood. It prolongs adolescence. In other words, kids with helicopter parents never actually become wise. They never become wise. So parents who want to keep their kids from making mistakes, from getting hurt, from failing in any way, so we make decisions for them. We write their emails. We intervene when there's danger or conflict. We're only prolonging their lack of wisdom. And if you have a God who's a helicopter God, you'll never become wise. And the Proverbs don't allow this. So on the one hand, the Proverbs cover many topics. They cover like how we relate to people. How do we deal with conflict? How do we manage our time? What should we do with our money? What are some important practices regarding our work, our habits? How should we plan ahead? Right? How do we use our words? How do we rest? How do we rest? And yet the Proverbs are sometimes extremely ambiguous and vague. Like for instance, the Proverbs won't tell you who you should date or where you should live or what job you should take or what school you should go to. The Proverbs won't tell you, when you should get a cell phone for your kids or how much screen time is appropriate. Rather, the Proverbs invites us to become the kind of people who know how to navigate those challenges as they arise. Now, I want to give you an example in the Proverbs of this ambiguity. And it's in chapter 26. And it says this in verse 4-5. I love this. It says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him." Next verse. "Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes." So which one is it? Do I answer the fool? Do I not answer the fool? By the way, I always have to think about this verse whenever I see interesting comments on social media. What do you do? Do I answer or do I not answer? We're not really told what to do because it's situational. It depends on the person, on the situation. It depends on the moment. It depends on where you're at. It depends on your relationship with that person, right? But sometimes I think, I prefer a helicopter God who comes and just tells me the right answer. But that's not how he works. Many years ago, I had this discussion. Many years ago. I was probably like 12 years ago. I was probably 17, 18, and we were having this in a church context. This discussion with some friends about relationships and wisdom, and one girl, she was bless her heart, she was so convinced. She said, I'm in this voice. I am not going to date anyone because God is just going to tell me who I'm going to marry. That's what she said. And a part of me was like, that's so sweet. That's really nice. But the sane part of me was like, warning, like helicopter God syndrome. Why would God? Yeah, right, God's gonna make sure that I don't have to learn communication skills or really learn any conflict resolution or really anything hard that might cause me to develop wisdom. He's just gonna tell me everything I should do. Spoiler, she's still waiting, by the way. I feel bad. Part of me feels bad. She's sweet, but she's just waiting. And I don't think she's dated at all. And I just feel like, wow, God is not a helicopter God. There's another error that we tend to make when growing in wisdom. And it's clear in the first chapter. And so chapter 1, you'll see it on the screen. It says in verse 20-22, it says, "Out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall, she cries out. At the city gate, she makes her speech. How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge?" We get this picture of wisdom as this woman. She's personified as a woman, calling out to everyone, making herself available to all. And yet, the writer tells us that most people have no interest in wisdom. Most people love their simple ways. They love to do what they've always done. See, there's this common assumption that I think the writer is pointing out, that wisdom is just gonna happen to us. That wisdom is just gonna come with experience. It's just gonna fall on my lap. It's not something I need to work at. It's not something I need to plan for or prioritize or make time for. It's just gonna happen to me. But the Proverbs say, well, actually, listen, incline your ear, pay attention, do not abandon it, pursue it with all of your heart, because it's worth more than silver or gold, and it doesn't just fall in your lap. It's actually really hard to find. What are you doing to make time to grow in wisdom? What are you doing to make time to grow in wisdom? Because it won't just happen. It won't just fall on your lap. A little while ago in our youth group, we go through different topics or series and teaching series and stuff like that. And a little while ago, we were doing this one series on relationships. And, sometimes we have relationships that, we need to know which ones are healthy and how do you manage relationships and are there toxic relationships? And then one of the discussions that we had, we talked about dating. And this is a topic that the teens really love to talk about, and parents not so much. But so we were talking about this, and I shared some of the lessons that I learned when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, and some of the mistakes I made when it comes to dating, dating the wrong person, and the pain and the consequences and the time and the money and all of these things that I regretted. And once I remember hearing this one response, and if you are a parent of teenagers, you've probably heard this before. It's, well, you turned out okay, right? You turned out okay. I mean, look, you're a pastor. So in other words, I can just make my mistakes. I'll date where I want. I'll do whatever I feel like doing. I'll explore and I'll be okay. I'll learn from my mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. I'll learn from I'll probably become a pastor like you. I'm like, no, hold it one second there. Most people do not learn from their mistakes, right? Think of your own life. Most of the time, we don't learn from our mistakes. That's not something that just happens. This is one of the greatest lies that we can believe, that somehow I'm gonna naturally grow in wisdom. I'll identify my mistakes, I'll learn from them, and I'll never do them again. That doesn't happen. The Bible warns us and reminds us over and over and over. Most people don't learn from their mistakes. In fact, most of us, all of us at some point, repeat the same mistakes over and over and over and over for years. And we want different results, but we keep doing the same old thing. And the writer of the Proverbs says, how long are you going to love your simple ways? The same old thing over and over and over. The writer will put it in another way later on in chapter 26. I love this verse. He says, as a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Don't believe the lie that wisdom just happens. It doesn't. So the Proverbs begins by asking us, when will wisdom be a priority for you? So, how do we grow in wisdom? How do we become people who are wise? Okay, so I just want to take a step back and look at the Book of Proverbs. And the Book of Proverbs, you may know, is part of a collection of books called a wisdom literature. Okay, part of the Old Testament, part of the wisdom literature. And most scholars will, in this collection of books, will put the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the book of Job. So you'll see that on the next slide there. The Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the book of Job. And I want you to imagine that these three books are like three people, symbolized by three people, sitting around a table and discussing the question, what does it mean to live wisely in the world? What does it mean for us to have wisdom? And in a way, I want you to see this as they're having a conversation, they're having a dialogue, and they're not necessarily going to agree with each other all the time. They might have different emphases or different perspectives, but they will ultimately all come to the same conclusion, a very important conclusion. So we have the Proverbs. We start with the Proverbs. The Proverbs, I want you to think of this young teacher, smart teacher, young, and sees patterns in the world. And for the most part, this teacher believes that the world is pretty straightforward, pretty black and white, right? You do good things, you'll get good results. You live wisely, the better your life will be. You will suffer less, and the fool will suffer more. Basically, a kind of black and white view of the world for the most part. And, it's kind of true, generally speaking. The wiser you are, the better your life will be. And we start to see this theme throughout the Proverbs. Now, then you get Ecclesiastes. And I love this book. Ecclesiastes, I want you to think of this middle-aged man, kind of cynical, a critic. He's been through some pretty rough times. And he asks the question that I think we'll all ask at some point in our life, which is what happens? What happens when wisdom doesn't lead to a good life? What happens when the wise person experiences terrible things? What happens when the wise person suffers and it seems like the fool is rewarded? I love how honest the writer of Ecclesiastes is. He enters a really dark place. I love this book. You should read it with your kids. And he goes on and he talks about how, life isn't black and white, and if you think you could use wisdom to guarantee success, think again, because life is confusing and disorienting and uncontrollable, and sometimes good people suffer. And you could try to control life by gaining knowledge, but it'll end in vanity. Vanity. He keeps saying that, vanity. And then, so he kind of pushes back on the Proverbs. And then you have the book of Job. And the book of Job, I want you to imagine just this older man sitting at this table, and he tells this story of an old man who lives this righteous life. And he's blameless. And he's living wisely in the world, and you could tell that he is blessed. And yet, he suffers. So what happens? His friends show up. His friends show up, and they're like, we've been reading the Proverbs, and we could tell that because you're suffering, you must have sinned. You must have done something to really offend God. What did you do? You sinned, didn't you? And then Job responds by saying, no, I didn't. And then the friends respond by saying, yes, you did. And then Job responds by saying, no, I didn't. And then the friends respond by saying, yes, you did. And then this goes on for 30 chapters, just back and forth. It's a beautiful book. And it goes on and on and on. And then finally, right towards the end of the book, God shows up. He shows up with this big monologue, right? And he doesn't address their questions because he's not a helicopter God, right? But he confronts them. And he says, where were you when I created the world? Do you think you know anything about anything? Do you think you know wisdom? You think with your wisdom and your knowledge, you've got me all figured out? Think again. Remember, these books are discussing this question. What does it really mean to have wisdom? What does it mean? And what they all conclude with is this very important reality that wisdom is impossible without what is called the fear of the Lord. Wisdom is impossible with this thing without the fear of the Lord. And he says this in chapter 1 of Proverbs. It says, wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. Other translations say the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. And you see that in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job, they come to the same conclusion. Now, I just want to clarify, the fear of the Lord is not the same thing as like being afraid of spiders, okay? Or being afraid of the dark, or being afraid of snakes. That's not what it means. This language of the fear of the Lord is always used in the context of what is called a covenant, which is basically God's promise to his people that he will not abandon them, that he is for them, and that he loves them. And in fact, in 1 John says that God is love, and perfect love casts out fear of judgment. So it's not this sense that we're afraid that God's just gonna crush us out of nowhere. No, that's not what it is. Fear of the Lord is this posture that says, I cannot control God. Though he gives me wisdom, though he makes himself known to me, I cannot fully capture God in my mind. It's kind of like a boundary. I'm human, he's God. I cannot totally figure him out. I cannot use God for my own advantage. I cannot hurt or destroy others in the name of God. I don't decide what God cares about. He invites me to have wisdom, but I dare not use that wisdom to be not right, not just, and not fair. Growing up, I think a lot of people, even today, a lot of people, will say, the fear of the Lord is really just respect and reverence. And I would say that's partially true. And the reason why I say that is because if we took a survey in this whole room and we asked everybody, what is respect and reverence? We would get 100 different answers, right? Because most of the time when people say respect and reverence, what they mean is respect and reverence on how I define it and how my culture defines it. And for me, I grew up in church, and I always kind of came to this conclusion that the fear of the Lord, and this might not be your experience, but for me growing up, the fear of the Lord and respect and reverence really meant wearing the right things when you go to church. Having the right clothes. And apparently, and this always boggled my mind growing up, that apparently God gets really, really offended. He feels really disrespected if I'm wearing like the wrong cloth on my legs. And that's fine if you think that. But this is a problem. I grew up, when I went to Bible college, I was in Bible college for a little while, and there was this lady, wonderful lady, devout lady, loved God and loved the Bible, and she was just a little bit more old school, I guess, in her thinking. And, she would say this one thing over and over, and this was America, okay, so just be gracious. But she would say, if you were going to see the President of the United States of America, you would wear a suit. And so I thought, I didn't say this, but I thought it. So in your mind, the President of the United States of America and God, creator of the cosmos, also known as Jesus Christ of Nazareth, same value system of what respect and reverence is. Same thing. Friends, when we do that, that's a form of what the Bible calls idolatry, of making God into our image, of deciding what God really cares about, of deciding what God considers reverence and respect and love for him. We don't get to decide that. He does. God decides what is reverence and what is respectful, not me and not my culture. And the problem with this is that it becomes a deviation, a distraction for what really matters. See, I never really thought that maybe being cliquey, being judgmental, being gossipy, or being racist would be considered irreverent to God, would be considered disrespectful to God. Maybe the fear of the Lord has much more to do with being the kinds of people who care about what is right, what is just, and what is fair. So it says, Proverbs 1:7, wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Fools despise wisdom. It's clear, connected to this idea that a person without the fear of the Lord is someone who can't receive correction and instruction. Wisdom begins by inviting God to confront the parts of us that is foolish so as to make us wise. Welcoming God to confront our brokenness. It's scary. It's terrifying. It's the fear of the Lord, but it is the beginning of wisdom. It begins with this posture that's saying, God, like there are parts of me that are foolish. There are parts of me that you need to address. There are parts of me that only you can heal and fix. Really, wisdom begins with a posture of prayer. So it's actually quite appropriate that we're starting this series on Proverbs right after a series on prayer. Because wisdom begins with a posture of prayer that says, God, is there something in me that offends you? Is there something in me, a pattern in my life, priorities in my life that are foolish and need to change? Do I care at all about what is right, just, and fair? What's at stake for you if you don't grow in wisdom? What is at stake for you? Maybe you are in a situation right now where you need wisdom. You need serious wisdom right now. You're desperate for wisdom. Maybe you're not, but we will all get to a place where we will need wisdom. Where we will have a moment in a challenge, a crisis, a situation where we're like, we need God to give us wisdom. And we cannot assume that wisdom will just happen to us. We cannot assume that as I get older, I'll get wiser. Or that I'm really just too young to care about growing in wisdom. Or that I'll just learn from my mistakes. It begins by responding to God's invitation. So I'm going to invite the band. The band's going to come up. And we're going to sing another song. God comes to us and invites us and says, hey, I want to make you into a people who are wise. They're a people who are wise because there's a world filled with people that are living in circumstances and situations that is not right, that is not just, and that is not fair. I want to help you become the kind of people who behave in a way that honors me, that begins with the fear of the Lord so that you could be people who build their house on the rock. Would you stand with me? We're going to pray. The band's going to lead us in another song, and you might be in a situation right now where you need wisdom. Maybe just don't focus too much on that situation. What does it mean for you to enter into what is called the fear of the Lord? This posture of surrendering to God, saying, God, here I am. Here I am. Let's pray. God, you care deeply about this world that we live in, that you created. And you're not a helicopter parent who gives us easy answers, but you care to make us people who are wise, who put first things first. God, may we care about what you care about. May we be the kinds of people who get to the end of our lives and are able to look back and say, you've given us wisdom. You've taught us. We've learned from our mistakes. We didn't repeat the same mistakes over and over. God, we're thankful that even in our mistakes, you are gracious, not just to forgive, but to transform. Help us now to be the kinds of people who become wise. So much is at stake. Help us to see that. Help us to love you, Lord. To love you in the way that you have asked us to love you. In Jesus' name, amen.